Good morning and welcome to another edition of AWSP TV. My name is Scott Friedman, Associate Director here with AWSP, and we are very excited to have with us today for her second appearance, Dr. Michaela Miller, Deputy Superintendent of OSPI. Dr. Miller is here today to help us understand and provide some clarity to the principals that are out and about in the field with House Bill 1599 in relationship to the policy changes that affect the graduation of students not only now but in the future as we move forward in our educational system. Along with providing some clarity today, we will also be working on identifying the steps that principals can be doing right now as they begin to implement House Bill 1599, and along with principals, school districts as well. And then, as we wrap up this morning in this AWSP TV newscast, we also want to begin having some clarity and an idea about what could districts and what could schools and what could school principals and the counseling staffs expect in the future from House Bill 1599. Well, with that as the backdrop for today, and Dr. Michaela Miller, again, thank you so much for being with us today. I thought we'd just kind of go ahead and kick things off with kind of the background and the notion that led to the policy changes and the passing of House Bill 1599.
Great, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be back at AWSP TV. We're going to kick off today with a little bit of background for everyone that's been through kind of the roller coaster of graduation requirements over the last several years. Really, this work started, Scott, in a couple of years ago with 2224, House Bill 2224, which passed and kind of set an incremental step in terms of changing graduation requirements so that it wasn't based on two single test scores, but rather opened up the idea of pathways for students. As many principals know already, there were grad alternatives, which were in place and have been in place for a long time. In looking around the country, we were one of just a handful of states that were still using the Smarter Balanced Assessment as a graduation requirement. And so looking at what our students needed, what our state needed in terms of graduation, we have one of the most rigorous diplomas in the country, hands down. And so as we look to what are some of the ways we can put in place articulating the ideas around the high school and beyond plan, which is a centerpiece of our graduation requirements, and our course requirements or our credits, and then what path are students going to be taking as they move on into their next step, whether it's college or career. We want to make sure students are prepared for that next step. And so backwards mapping that idea of making pathways that are equitable across, that they have the same level of rigor across different pathways. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of years analyzing the current grad alternatives and looking at ways that we could expand even further to include things like ASVAB. We recognize that students that are moving into their next step with the military did not necessarily have that as an articulated pathway. Students that are moving into a career that requires an industry recognized credential or some pathway into a community college or a technical school didn't have necessarily a pathway. So as we took stock of the requirements around the 24 credits, the high school and beyond plan, we added this career pathway. So identifying what that looks like, starting back even in middle school as students are preparing their high school and beyond plans to the next step. So we started kind of tweaking this back in 2017 with House Bill 2224, which provided an expedited waiver for students. And some students accessed that over the last couple of years. We've analyzed the results of those. Many students were moving into a community college setting for their next step after high school. But some students were looking at other ways of demonstrating that career and college readiness. So in the last year, we've taken that kind of foundational piece of the expedited waiver, and instead of making this a waiver or alternatives, we said, why don't we just make these pathways that are equitably accessed by all students. Instead of them looking them as alternatives to something else, looking at them as truly pathways for all students. So that's a little bit of the history without going too much into the weeds of that. As principals know, we kept the waiver for the next couple of years, so the class of 2019 and the class of 2020 will still have access to that expedited waiver, but the preparation we want to work alongside principals around this year has to do with analyzing the new pathways, not referring to them as alternatives, but really digging in and saying, how can we make these pathways accessible for all students? Mm-hmm. The other piece with this is not all students will do a single pathway. Many of them will choose multiple pathways. So a student that actually meets standard maybe on the Smarter Balance, but also is going through a CTE course sequence, may also end up taking the ASVAB or the ACT or the SAT. So not to look at these as discrete pathways, but we know students might have access to and may take advantage of multiple pathways, which is why that's kind of the phrase we've been using, is looking at this more as a multi-pronged approach rather than kind of fitting everybody into a single funnel out into maybe what has been perceived in the past as a 4-year path.
Right. Well, and listening to you speak about the impetus behind and the reflective nature of taking a look at our system from the past, mm-hmm. and listening to the voices from the field, yep. In regards to them saying, you know, I've got student X, Y, and Z that are really, really interested in this. Yep. Yet there's only one way for them to get through. So the recognition of the multiple pathway pieces as a vehicle, yep. to meet standard. Right. The students still have to meet standard, right. but as a way to meet standard, I think is one that's very, very, very well done. Yep. I think I've heard Superintendent Reichdahl say a couple of times, or through conversations, where, you know, our system isn't necessarily responsible for something that happens to the student 10 years from now, right. even though we might feel like it's that way. Yep. But we should be responsible for what happens the year after they leave, yep. the year after they graduate. Yes. And when you talk about the high school and beyond plan and other things, and the pathways, I think it adds that in, yep. And begins to make that a reality, yep. for all students. Yeah, and I think this piece of legislation was, I think, especially well thought out in a couple of ways. One, it was a bipartisan effort, which you had both Republicans and Democrats throughout the process of getting this to the final stages of the governor's signature, with a thoroughly, pretty much a wholehearted 100% bipartisan effort, which in the legislature doesn't happen very often. So I think that was an exciting first step. The other piece that I think to recognize, and for principals and for district administrators out there, that it contemplated that this isn't the only stopping point, because it identified a need to look further at our additional pathways. So this isn't a closed book, we're done, we're going to finish this, we're going to get this done, and it's all going to look exactly the same this next couple right. of years, but that the legislature actually contemplated an analysis of future pathways that may come from the field. So I think one of the things I want to make sure that we get across today is that we will be constantly listening to, and this is really our first step in this, is this conversation today, which is listening to the field, what's working, what's not working, how can we make sure that the state is allowing locals to make decisions that's in the best interest of their students, and that contemplating future pathways is part of that plan. Right. Right. Well, and those are very critical points and key points there when you talk about the work that maybe OSPI has in front of them in yep. terms of the implementation of these pieces. Right. What other constituent groups are also a part of some of this decision-making process that we talk about pathways and other yep. things of that, but are there other groups that are involved in determining the rules, yep. so to speak?
Yep. So one of our critical partners is the State Board of Education. Mm-hmm. So they have rulemaking authority and have actually had rulemaking authority about many components of the graduation requirements over the past several years. So that relationship will continue. We've already had several meetings with them. They're going to start the rulemaking process. So that relationship is critical. Just as, if you think about it, it's kind of similar to the relationship between the school district administrators and their school boards. So at a state level. So that relationship of what are the general policies and rulemaking around this, giving enough guidance and breadth, and then leaving some of the pieces of the implementation on the part of the superintendents, if you think about it that way. That's somewhat the relationship between the state board and OSPI in this, and so we have an ongoing and good relationship, open dialogue with the State Board of Education, similar to and hopefully modeling the kinds of relationships between school boards, local school boards, and their administrators who are trying to implement this. So if you think about that at the local level, at the state level, it would be WASDA, the School Directors Association. We will be working closely with them as board policy needs to change related to some of the grad pathways. But just that same relationship at the local level will really include parent groups that need to have a voice in this and understand the changes for their students. So local parent groups. The school administrators, principals are going to be a key piece of this as they're thinking about this, doing an inventory of current pathways in their own schools and districts, working with their district administrators on this, and then working with their local school board. So I think the partnerships that are involved at the state level, we always look to AWSP, the Principals Association, WASA, the School Administrators Association, as well as WEA as we're thinking about implementing these things. But there are, in this particular bill, there are an array of different stakeholders that we will constantly need feedback from as we're going through this kind of evolution of implementation. It's going to be kind of a constant back and forth on that. So.
Well, and I appreciate that because the different constituents, the different stakeholders that are a part of all of this obviously leads to some of the complexity of the implementation.
For sure.
And that was evident by our WASP board, our secondary school principal board of AWSP when 1599 was first passed and we had our spring meeting. And the hundreds of questions that came about just from that. And so obviously we'll continue to engage, and that's what led us here today. So we're so thankful again for the opportunity to sit down with you and to kind of walk through some basic tenets. And a number of the pieces we're going to touch on today came directly from principals across the state. And so let's dive right in.
Okay. That's great.
Well, you've mentioned this multiple times in relationship to pathways. And previously, there were 2 or 3 different ways with alternative assessments that students could demonstrate standard, the COE, among other things like that. What are the 2, if I remember correctly, there's 2 new additional pathways that students might have access, or that students would have access to in relationship to meeting standard?
So, going back to some of the current alternatives, even some of those were tweaked and changed as well. And so we'll get in and actually very soon, today or tomorrow, we'll be launching our frequently asked questions, our FAQ, on our website, along with a PowerPoint that explains a little bit about the background of some of the pathways. So even though some have been in place, there are some changes and we want to make sure everybody understands those changes. We really approached, as I think about it, and I think in presenting to the board in the past, we have a 3-legged stool to our graduation requirements. The high school and beyond plan, the credits, and then these pathways, these current pathways. In the past, folks have looked at these as kind of this binary choice. I either pass my Smarter Balance or I go through these alternative pathways, right? So that's how they've looked at those in the past. It's going to take some time to get folks to move past that idea of Smarter Balance or these, to look at all of these pathways equally. And so that's the first kind of big step that everybody is going to have to take, is that it's not a single one, as I mentioned before, but it's looking at the whole array of different pathways and looking at what fits that student need the best.
So that linear path that we may have recognized in the past is still a way.
Absolutely.
However, it's not the holistic approach in regards to a well-rounded
Absolutely.
educational experience.
Absolutely. So the couple of the big ones that folks have been looking at, I mentioned already, the ASVAB is one.
Mm-hmm.
So the military entrance assessment is one new pathway that is articulated. And so the state board has a responsibility for setting those scores, setting those cut scores. And so there's going to be more information from the state board on that, as well as some information on our FAQ, just to kind of start the ball rolling on that.
Well, and that was actually one of the big questions a lot of
Right.
high school principals had is what would the cut score look like?
Yep.
And there's different passing scores
Correct.
for each branch.
Right,
So,
correct.
the questions around which branch is going to be used, which branch isn't going to be used,
Right.
does it be this, does that, how does it do that?
Yep.
And so you indicated that the state board,
Yep.
that's one of the things they're responsible
Yep.
for determining.
Determining,
Okay,
right.
okay.
And we've already had a lot of work, as well as the state board has already reached out and done several conference calls and others to just get the kind of foundational understanding of what this looks like. We have the benefit at OSPI. One of the things that the expedited waiver offered us is a window into some of this information ahead of time. And ASVAB was one. In fact, one of the first students that I think the first student that accessed the expedited waiver 2 years ago was going into the military, had been accepted into the
Right.
military, and we were able to grant their expedited waiver, I think 2 days before he entered into basic training. So
Those are the stories we like to
those
hear.
are the
right? Yeah,
stories we
those
like
are the
to
good
hear,
ones.
right?
Hey, the
So
system worked.
The system worked, and so we were able to get that. He was able to get his diploma, and he was able to enter basic training all within about a 2 or 3 day period.
Yeah.
And so we had a bit of a window into what that looks like, because at the local level, you're not going to necessarily be able to determine really early on which branch of the military.
Right.
And so this is going to be a consideration that the state board takes up in looking at, okay, we do have different branches having different cut scores. How do we then set some policy at the state level that's able to attend to all of those different factors? So that's something that I know we have some experience with just getting a window into this with the expedited waiver, but passing that baton on to the state board so
Right.
they can do that determination and kind of understand what that looks like at the local level. The next one is around CTE pathways, which has probably gotten the most attention.
Yeah.
We're excited about that. I learn every day about CTE a little bit more, and I am excited to learn
and
more
principals
about.
are going to learn a little bit more about it too, aren't
yes,
they?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So I think we're excited about this one in particular. One, because of the emphasis our office has put on CTE over the last couple of years. Increasing the number of dual credit opportunities within CTE, really thinking about CTE as not a separate standalone system, but something that is integrated with the kind of learning, especially as we look at our CTE equivalency work and some other pieces, really looking at this as a tapestry of how principals are putting together their master
Right.
schedules. And it is incredibly hard work. And this offers a new complexity to that process as well. I think because we're in this place right now of graduation and everybody's focused on different things, this is a really good opportunity for principals to meet with their CTE directors. They may be the CTE director in their school, depending on the size, in their district, depending on the size of their district.
Meeting of one.
Meeting of one.
Yeah.
But to really sit down, meet with administrators at the district level, CTE and others, and probably other high school and middle school principals. I would include middle school as they're looking ahead to the next step and how that high school and beyond plan looking forward. Because I do think middle school principals need to be aware of the things that are coming for their students. But to really sit down and look and create an inventory of their current CTE courses. As they're doing that, looking at whether or not they are dual credit or have industry recognized credentials attached to them would be a first step in just analyzing what's my current status of CTE sequences look like.
So if we could
Yep.
pause there, because
Sure.
that was a lot.
Okay, yeah.
And great.
Yep.
By the way, so if I'm sitting back as a high school principal and or counselor, staff, whatever the case may be,
Right.
as I understand things right now, the CTE coursework could be a combination of 2 courses or 3 courses, whatever the case may be, or single courses,
Dual credit.
in order to meet either ELA or math
Yep.
in regards to standard for that pathway.
Right,
Is that
right.
is that?
Yeah, and CT is a little bit different because it doesn't have necessarily the same ELA and math, and we'll be able to articulate this on the FAQ a little bit more. But right now, what I'd like principals to do is just take their CTE sequences, work with someone, and it could be their counselor, their registrar, their CTE director, because they all, for the purposes of CTE, enter into our EDS system and get approved for a CTE course. So that already is being done.
And that's through the framework process, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're going in and they're already creating a template inside of our EDS system at OSPI to get these programs approved. Now, how that manifests in a school might be different. So I'll use the example of yearbook, for example, which oftentimes is taught by a CTE teacher. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. But that, in some places, is a standalone course, right? As you're thinking about the sequence, in some places they have embedded yearbook inside of a program sequence. So I think shifting folks from thinking about I do or I don't have these pathways to what do I really have, what am I using as standalone, and what am I using as a sequence,
Right.
or how can I shift into a sequence so
Into a
that makes some sense and is an articulated program sequence. So I think that before everybody leaps to I do or I don't have this pathway available to students, doing that inventory on the front end and just analyzing with their CTE directors what's currently either a program sequence that includes a dual credit course, because like you said, that could be a single course, or is it connected to an industry recognized credential? And those two are kind of the first stopping points, and then analyzing what are my standalone,
Right.
what am I looking at as my standalone, and then as principals, after they do that first kind of step into this which is just more of a district level conversation, and if they have questions, reaching out to our CTE office to help kind of figure this out as they go along will be critical, and our CTE office stands ready to take some of these questions, understand what understand the problems, maybe point them in the direction of how can they create these sequences rather than trying to do it all on their own. So.
And you may not know the answer to this, so
I probably don't.
If you,
Yeah.
So if you don't, that's okay.
Okay.
But you mentioned the CTE department at OSPI. Is there work that they'll be doing to push stuff out to schools that might be recommendations or templates for course sequencing?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's definitely in the works. Part of this again is a conversation with the State Board of Education, because as I mentioned, they have rulemaking authority. We've already started an initial conversation with Executive Director Randy Spalding and staff around what that rulemaking could look like, and I know they are really wanting to get this going so that schools have an idea of what this looks like coming on 1920, which will definitely be a transition year as we're looking at this. We still have the expedited waiver for the class of 2020, so that have principals keep that in mind as they're kind of ramping this up. But the best thing to do is after graduations are over and after everybody takes a deep breath and maybe goes away for a little bit, to come back and do this kind of inventory of their current CTE sequences, and then figure out how do I make changes, can I make changes for this coming year. Given master schedules are done, staffing is usually done by this point, it's going to be hard to kind of turn that ship, but this year should be spent kind of turning the ship of CTE within districts to try and get aligned to their course sequences. as we get information about this, we will be turning that over from our CTE office so that there's more guidance at the local level.
Good. So in relationship to the CTE pathways, step number one, just as you've been talking about, is do that coursework inventory.
Yep.
Determine as best as possible the sequencing that takes place.
Correct.
That leads to some kind of industry recognized standard or dual credit course, whatever it is,
Correct.
and or to an apprenticeship program.
Correct.
And then along with that, if there's singleton classes as a part of that, can they be put into some kind of a sequence?
Correct.
Or are they dual credit related?
Correct.
And if so, good, good to go there.
Yeah,
So,
and it doesn't mean that you can't have singletons.
Right.
If that works for your district, in some large high schools, that may be perfectly appropriate for the school and where it's at. It doesn't mean that every single CTE course has to be in a program sequence necessarily that aligns to this, but the more that you can shift in that direction, the more pathways are available for students.
Okay.
So.
Good. Well, and through the conversation of the CTE pathways, you touched on the dual credit pieces.
Yep.
Dual credit meaning the college and the high school, the articulated agreements through CTE,
Correct.
Running Start, different
Yep.
pieces like
Yep.
that. How's the dual credit piece fit into the pathway portions?
So dual credit is a separate part. It can be included into the CTE sequences, as we just mentioned, but it also is a separate standalone and has been for the last couple of years, actually. So, so that dual credit in ELA or math still stands. So that is an option for students that may or may not be connected to a CTE program.
Okay, and one of the questions I know we got from principals across the state in regards to Running Start was, in some cases, a student will access a Running Start class that'll count for their high school senior English course, and they pass it, and it might be Intro to Drama. But because it comes back and counts as a senior English course, then that would be interpreted as meeting the ELA standard. Okay. And that was one of those, anyway, that was one of those that down in the weeds kind of question that came in, and because they're wondering, how does this work with this and that? It's not a direct relationship to. And,
That's right.
So are there going to be some guiding documents or ideas around that?
Yeah, there'll be some guidance. It's interesting in some places, like in the AP and IB places, they actually, well, AP particularly, they put in specific courses, and in other places they left it pretty wide, wider open. So as we go through, and the FAQ touches on this, but may not get to the level of detail that counselors and principals are wanting right this moment. So as we continue to get those kinds of questions, the questions that came in originally for this were extremely helpful for our team as we were kind of walking through our 14-page FAQ to actually get a kind of a head start on, all right, what are some of the weedy kinds of questions that principals are trying to work through as they contemplate what their master schedule might look like for the 2021 school year, in addition to kind of shifting over this using this 1920 year as this transition place. I mean, a lot of this will have to do with all of the moving parts, as we talked about before we started. You may have just a couple of kids over here that want to access this. That has a lot to do with factors outside of just a master schedule planning. That has to do with your staffing.
Right.
That has to do with hiring the teachers that you need in order to do this. So we look at 1920 as this kind of on-ramp year, thinking about all of those other connected pieces: hiring, staffing from the district level to the school level, and master scheduling. As you're thinking about putting all of those pieces in place, this is really a complex puzzle. You may want to offer this class, but you can't hire a teacher in that particular area. So you can't really look at these as discrete pieces. They all have to kind of fit this big puzzle that principals deal with every year.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the stool that you used, where you had the credits, meeting standard, and the pathway pieces, is the same thing with the master scheduling.
Absolutely.
When one leg of the stool is a little bit weaker,
Yep.
it's not going to be able to support what it is that you're trying to do.
That's right.
Good. Well, the dual credit one obviously is one that's on everybody's minds, and it's nice that it's being looked at and things are being taken care of that way. I know one other piece that's kind of come out, and you've mentioned it a couple of different times, is the high school and beyond plan.
Yep.
And the notion behind that being the guiding document of a student's educational career.
Right.
That's kind of that path. That doesn't mean it's got to be set in stone like that.
Yeah.
But what do principals have to do now in relationship to that high school and beyond plan? Because pieces have been in place for years.
Yeah.
And now with the requirement being back to the middle school level over the past couple of years, it's starting sooner.
Yes.
It's transitioning up.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind it isn't different.
Yes.
And it's been utilized.
Yep.
But if I'm sitting as a high school principal, what should I begin to look at now in relationship to that? What additional pieces have to go in at this point, moving forward, to be ready for the transition to the electronic version?
Yeah. So I look at this. I think I look at this as an opportunity for vertical teaming in a way. So we talk about vertical teaming with standards and teachers all the time, right? So from elementary to middle to high. This is an opportunity for vertical teaming with admin and counselor teams at the middle school level and admin and counselor teams at the high school level. I know how impactful it is personally as a teacher when I was able to vertically team as a 9th grade English language arts teacher backwards into my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade counterparts at the middle level. It gave me an aha. I stopped saying, "What are those middle school teachers doing?" Right? You go, "Oh, okay."
They teach them how to use a comma.
I know. God, jeez. But I think that vertical alignment between the middle school and the high school is going to be critical. We also know that developmentally, students are not necessarily picking their career paths when they're in 6th grade. Right. They're playing Fortnite or something else. They're not usually thinking necessarily about a specific career. But we want to get them into the mindset of thinking about this. And the High School and Beyond Plan provides a tool that creates some equity across the system for all kids. That idea, that concept of being able to use a plan with parents involved, with administrators, counselors, hopefully their teachers, they're entering into, as a middle school student, the first time they're probably in a situation where they have multiple class periods to go to. They have multiple things to look at. And I think it is critical that as you go back to the middle school level and think about the developmental needs of those kids in relation to where they're at with their course taking and making decisions, having that foundational piece creates equity across the system in terms of students being able to access and have a voice in where they want to go and what they want to do. So in my mind, it really levels the playing field for that. The challenge on the other side of that, so there's an equity argument on the one hand. On the other hand, we know that the staffing for middle school counselors in particular is not where it should be. So we know that in the best of all worlds, we have counselors that have more of a hands-on approach to helping students even access the different aspects of their career pathways or their pathways for high school. And that's going to be something I know our office is going to be working on kind of separately in a staffing enrichments work group. So thinking about, are we currently staffing these schools at the way they should be in order to get the best bang for our buck with the high school and beyond plan? So that's the first piece of this, is that the equity argument in terms of every student having access to a really solid high school and beyond plan that is developed. They have voice in it, they have agency with that, and that their parents are involved in that process as well. That takes a lot of coordination on the part of the administrators and the counselors, a lot of time, a lot of maybe using classroom teachers differently in terms of that relationship between the high school and beyond plan. I think opening this up so that the high school and beyond plan is something that everyone in the school is aware of, that it's not something that's just held by the counseling office or just held by the administrators, but it's something that everybody is aware of as they think about these students as individuals. And then the next step of that phase, and I always think of, I've always thought about the seams in our system, and I mean seams like seams in a dress or seams in a outfit. The seams of the system are essentially, just going to be essential. So that 8th grade to 9th grade transition is going to be critical for those students. So as those students are passing on a high school and beyond plan into the high school, all of a sudden a lot of things start to kick in. Classes count, right? All of a sudden, and they are looking ahead towards graduation, and they have graduation requirements, and they have all of these responsibilities at the high school level. And so the more those transitions can be articulated in that vertical teaming between the administrators and counselor teams to the high school teams is going to be really, really critical. So the changes really with the high school and beyond plan, the actual changes in it were fairly minimal. We added a requirement around financial aid information at the high school level for the high school and beyond plan. But what we were trying to emphasize, and I know that the emphasis from 1599 was really on how useful are these plans for students. And I think some of the attention was started to ramp up from 2224, which was provided the expedited appeal. I talked to counselors all over the state that were like, whoa, I got to get my high school and beyond plans up to speed.
Right.
So there was a little bit of a emphasis on it just a couple of years ago, and now with 1599, we now have the opportunity to really think about how do we do these differently, how do we use the electronic system differently, whether they're using it within Skyward or another system, so that there is better communication with parents, better communication with students, empowering students to be part of that process, and then better articulation to what are my opportunities, having students reflect on that, think about what are my next steps are, and then gearing them up to the pathways that are available once they hit 11th and 12th grade.
Well, and listening to you, and I'm reflecting and stepping back into being the principal.
Yep.
And thinking about that, and I really loved what you were saying about trying to draw that vertical teaming and working with counseling and administrators at the middle schools and or junior highs, whatever your configuration might be like, with the high schools. And then the other thing that kind of popped into my mind was in relationship to how does the high school and beyond plan become a living, breathing document that kind of guides. It doesn't mean it's not flexible.
That's right.
And again, the one thing that popped in my head was, well, what a great vehicle for student conferences.
That's right.
And pulling that document out, and it's the one that's used to guide the conversation that happens.
Yep.
Because you have your parents or guardians there, you have the teachers there, the student explains what's gone on with their coursework and where they want to be, so to speak.
Right.
And touch on the FAFSA part again. So for if I understood you correctly, as a requirement for this year's high school and beyond plans, it needs to show that a student has successfully filled out their FAFSA form?
That they have information around financial aid. So it's not specific necessarily to FAFSA, although we know that is the one, or the WAFSA.
Right.
We know that's the tool. We also recognize that a lot of students are getting exposure to the FAFSA and WAFSA through College Bound in middle school, and so, which is great. But we want to expand that so that all students have some exposure to it before they hit their senior year.
Yeah.
So, so part of planning is that you don't hit that financial aid point when you're in the fall of your senior year, but you have some information as an on-ramp. Anyone that's filled out the FAFSA out there knows that it takes a little bit of time and understanding. So they're getting better at it.
What's that EIC? That's too much.
They have a new app, but anyone that has experienced that as a parent, which I have couple of times, knows that there is definitely some education on the part of the parents with this in addition to the students. So the earlier that you can get financial aid information before they hit their senior year and have to start making decisions in a very compressed amount of time, getting information ahead of time on that, information, collecting that kinds of information, and looking at financial aid, I think, as more of a kind of holistic, not just the FAFSA and WAFSA, which is an important and critical piece to post-secondary education, but also looking at opportunity for scholarships and other things outside of maybe the realm of just singular financial aid from the state or from the feds. So that includes definitely counselors that are involved in being able to make sure that every student has access and knows the kinds of scholarships, awards, financial aid that is available to them, a whole array of different pieces. And I really think one of the pieces of impetus is that you don't sign up, for example, for College Bound in middle school and then forget about it for 3 years and then all of a sudden be hit with this, I have to do something about this, but that there's a conversation that's going on along their high
Well, I know
school.
there's many programs in school, whether it's Avid or College Bound or whatever, that, that kind of filter, and the advisory programs in many places,
That's absolutely
automatically bring those in. And sooner is better than later. In terms of financial for college and FAFSA or WAFSA and whatnot. There's no actual requirement that it has to be done by a certain grade level, is there?
No.
Okay. Okay. So sooner than later.
Yes.
Obviously, because planning is extremely important, but there's no requirement to have it done by sophomore or junior. So
and we'll have some guidance on that through our electronic high school and beyond plan information. We have lots of good templates already available for schools that are out there. So I think this is one of the places where instead of putting something in rule or in RCW, it is better done in guidance where we can say these are the best practices, and this is where the field comes in and is instrumental in this, is where are the best places to have those points of contact along the way. And so the more we can build up, and we already have great examples of this in our work with WASAC, which is another partner, the Washington Student Achievement Council, who does a lot of the financial aid work in our state, the partnership with them, getting information out to them, so that it's not a select group of students that are identified for College Bound, but that every student has access to that same information. So building that into our guidance at the state level, so that our website is updated, WASAC's website is updated, and our direct touch on the counselors, administrators in the state, it goes beyond just a single RCW that says, again, everybody must do this. Well, how do you implement that, right?
Yeah. When you mentioned WASAC, and I know one of the biggest things that I learned through WASAC when I was in high school was the fact that as a school you can log on to their site and find out your FAFSA completion rate for your school. And I'll just throw this out there, that'd be awesome to include in what you put there, because as I travel around, some principals know about that and some don't. But I think that would be a critical piece for them to be able to know that they have access to determine the financial aid completion rate for their seniors or whenever they perform that stuff. But we've talked a lot about obviously the high school and beyond plan and dual credit pieces and college, all those other portions, CTE pathways there. And another component to this that kind of fits in, especially as you think about promoting and trying to provide a rigorous set of coursework. So the diploma is meaningful. I mean, that's really the bottom line, is that the diploma is meaningful for each student. And that might look different, obviously, but we want to ensure that there's some meaning behind the coursework they've done and some thought that goes into that. And one of those pieces is beginning to challenge themselves and seeking out coursework that's going to do that. And I know a component to 1599 was the academic acceleration piece. And if students do well in course X, then they automatically get enrolled in the next most challenging course. And that's the idea behind that. In regards to what districts and/or principals should be thinking about in relationship to academic acceleration, what would you give as like the one or two things that they should begin doing right now to prepare for that aspect?
So the first step would be to see if they already have board policy around academic acceleration. There are already school districts that have some sort of board policy and actually academic acceleration processes in place. So their first step is to see if they even have board policy or guidance from their district office around this, because some do. Some don't. So the first step, of course, with this will be working with WASDA to update some board policy around academic acceleration, and that will be happening over the summer and into the fall as well. The second thing is that, again, there's an on-ramp to this. So this isn't something that's going to be mandated for next year, but something that school districts will have to work towards as they think about this in the 2021 school year. So the first step is just to analyze where they're at in their district. Second step is, sometimes state law or state policy uses kind of a blunt instrument, like everybody's going to do academic acceleration, which is a very lofty aspirational idea that we want for all kids to have equitable access to the most rigorous classes. That some kids are not pushed off into other courses based on an IEP or some other things that are going on, that they really understand what are the next steps in and how can I challenge, how can I make sure that as a classroom teacher or a principal or a counselor that I'm challenging every student to reach their full potential. So as they are analyzing this, one component will of course be board policy and the positions that the district takes in terms of what sorts of forms parents are getting as they think about this.
And that's local.
That's going to be local, right.
Okay.
The second piece then will be the implementation of this, and that is probably going to be more challenging. I think the more we can look at students as holistically in terms of their whole course taking, giving them options and encouraging them into academic acceleration is going to be obviously a requirement of the law. But then really it goes back to and loops back to that high school and beyond plan, and making sure everything is connected so that it makes sense for the student in what they're going to be doing over all of their coursework and all of their pathways. So again, this ensures that students have an equitable access to all of those rigorous pathways. I used to, when I was teaching, go back to a teaching metaphor here, but I had all my ninth grade English. I taught ELA, and I would tell every single one of my students, I don't care what AP or rigorous class you take, you're going to take something, right? It doesn't matter. I would love for you to take ELA because personally I love English language arts, but you don't need to take AP Lit with me, but you need to have graduated with some aspect of your plan that includes rigor, because we know that the rigor of the difficulty and rigor of your high school career kind of dictates whether or not you're going to be able to persist after high school. That's really important that they're challenged. So I take that metaphor for this.
And that's a great metaphor, because it does. We know that research-wise, that if you, at least one or two classes that are going to challenge you.
That's right.
And it could be a variety. It doesn't have to be AP.
No.
I mean, it doesn't have to be IB or whatever. I mean, it could be a variety of different things.
That's right.
But and that whole persistence piece, and I guess the underlying factor with the whole academic acceleration portion is not that every student is supposed to go to a four-year school.
Right.
You know, we know. My assumption is that the forethought into this was thinking about any kind of post-secondary pursuit.
That's right.
We know the academic rigors of just an apprenticeship program or a pre-apprenticeship program.
That's right.
And the preparation that's necessary for that in
Right.
terms of your educational background.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think all of those things, I mean, taking the full kind of palette of what students have opportunities to do into consideration, and making sure that you're giving parents and students the opportunity to accelerate, particularly because that persistence piece in those classes will pay off, whatever their next post-secondary option is. That persistence piece in being challenged and the high school arena in terms of whatever course taking they decide on is going to be critical for that persistence later on in life.
Yeah.
And so especially as that next step. We know many of our community college students drop off pretty early, and so we want to make sure that every student has the opportunity to persist, and a lot of that comes down to the perseverance and rigor from what they experience in their high school courses.
Yeah, good. When I think a couple of changes or just systematic type things that's going to have for counselors and principals and schools and systems in general is that, you know, the you're automatically defaulted into, and then the conversations around changing your plan to not take the next most rigorous course. Right. So that'll be one of the changes, and that'll be dictated, determined by obviously board policy and other stuff. But it's the opting out of those courses that'll be probably the biggest systematic piece, I would assume, correct?
Yeah, I you know, again, going back to that idea of a blunt instrument, you can do this and have it be a very compliance-based thing. Everybody is just automatically, you know, registered.
Right.
And you don't give a whole lot of thought to the sense-making behind it. And principals really are the sense maker, the policy maker, sense makers at their school level. And so thinking about how to position this work so that it isn't, we've checked the box, everybody has moved into the next most rigorous course, right? That is the compliance-based way to approach this. And that is a challenge because there's a lot coming down on principals, and sometimes checklists are easy to do because you've just, you know, I've done what OSPI or what
there's
the
1,800 kids.
Exactly. There's 1,800 kids.
There's not a lot of me to go around.
1,800 things that I have to check off of my compliance
I've got
list.
2 counselors.
Exactly. So, but how to be, and the nice thing with this is to take the 1920 school year and really think about how will I do this so that it actually has an impact on all my students. Particularly those students that may often get shuffled off or not be as involved in their high school and beyond plan. So being really targeted around that and being very specific around how you're going to tackle that, instead of looking at it as, well, OSPI we're just going to register everybody and then we've checked off the list that folks have opted out. We want to make sure that counselors and administrators have the opportunity to really think through the application of this at the local level prior to the 2021 school year, because nothing is worse, and we don't want at OSPI things to be simply checklists for kids. Right. That doesn't really get at the targeted impact of the potential of what this looks like. And I know that is easier said than done because there's a lot coming down on principals, and it is incredibly complex work. And sometimes you're dealing with things that on a daily basis that are like getting stuff through a fire hose all the time. And so it's how to spend some time this next year in a team thinking about how are we going to implement this so that parents and students have agency around this and have some responsibility for it. That's going to be a hard shift. That's going to be that's really challenging to do. But this shouldn't be all on the principal's shoulders or all on the counselor's shoulders. How do we empower parents to take more responsibility for this? How do we empower students to take more responsibility of their high school and beyond plan? And that's going to be the challenge over the 1920 school year. Right.
Well, and you said the 1920 school year is that time period to kind of sit back, reflect, and see what systematic things are there, what barriers might be in place, and whether it's CTE pathways or dual credit or ASVAB, whatever it is, you know, or academic acceleration stuff, high school beyond plan. I mean, and then make some of those necessary tweaks and adjustments.
That's right.
And hopefully over that period of time, because I know some of the work that's been happening through OSPI and other areas is the recognition that the prototypical model is not necessarily one that supports fully this kind of a system.
That's right. That's right.
You know, it's principals and other people say quite a bit, you know, if I had a few more people, we could do all this stuff. So I know the continued work on that side will be critically important. Well, as we begin to kind of transition and wrap a couple things up here, because I'm sure we could spend 2 or 3 more hours going over a lot of this stuff, but neither you nor I, or probably the people out there, want to spend another 2 or 3. So, if you could dwindle things down just a little bit, and maybe to the 3 most important must-dos. And that might be difficult, obviously. So I don't. If you can, that'd be awesome. But sitting as a school, sitting as a principal, as a district, what are the 3 things that you'd say begin working on right now?
Well, I have 2 right off the top of my head, and I'll have to think really quickly on the third one. No, I have 3. One is to really think about this as a vertical teaming process, that they are working with their middle school counterparts, with their high school teams, and with the district office. So that this is really something that there's communication flowing between the different, and I would actually include elementary principals in that too. I think oftentimes we segment these in districts and have conversations with just high school principals about all of this. But if elementary and middle and high are all on the same page and thinking about this, there's a lot of things that can be seeded at the elementary level that can actually manifest in the middle and high. So I think those vertical conversations are going to be critical over the next year, for sure. There's no doubt that those conversations have to take place. A really deep understanding of each of the pathways, understanding of the high school and beyond plan, understanding the credits and the 2 credit waiver, all of those pieces will come into play. So really kind of setting out a vision for what this looks like in terms of a feedback loop among those teams. The second piece, because it's come up and it has such a bright light on it, would be the CTE pathways and doing that inventory. I would do that this summer.
Right.
Take some inventory of what your current, sit down with your CTE director, really have a deep conversation of it, look at your master schedule, understand all of this. CTE is a very complex beast in education, and to be able to understand it, as I've said, I learn something new about CTE every single day. And so I think really sitting down and having a deep understanding of that and really watching for guidance that's coming out from OSPI and the State Board of Education is going to be critical. And then the third piece is that high school and beyond plan, and having that articulated understanding of what this means. What are the different components of it? How does it currently operate? And then getting information out to parents that can help kind of facilitate those conversations as early as possible. Thinking about your different classes that you have coming in, articulating what they need to do, and then setting up the best possible situation for those high school and beyond plans to really take root in the students' lives is going to be critical. And then the fourth one is to breathe.
I only said 3.
I know, but I added
like
a fourth
that fourth
one.
one. I like that fourth one.
To just breathe and first of all take some time this summer to really get, I know everybody is in the race for the end of the year right now. Everybody is going through graduation ceremonies and trying to get this year kind of packed up and done. Take some time. We do an incredible job. We went over 80% of our graduation rate this last year, which is a huge accomplishment. The first time in Washington State history that we've gone over 80% in our graduation rate. We are excited about the trajectory that we are on. We think we're going to continue that growth over time. We think the pathways offer more opportunities for students to access what they're really good at, what they want to do, and what they want to do in their next step. So I think just a huge congratulations to all the high school principals out there that are juggling 4,000 different things every single day. But to take a deep breath, spend some time this summer reflecting on how amazing their teams are and the work that they do every year. And then really look at OSPI, the State Board, and other partners that we're working alongside them as we're moving forward into implementation.
Great. Well, wonderful things. And I actually like that fourth one, breathe.
Breathe.
I'm glad you added a fourth, breathe. And then I'm glad you talked about the celebration of the 80%. That is outstanding.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's just wonderful work, because in my role every day when I'm out and about and driving around and visiting schools, there's enormously great work happening.
Absolutely.
Caring loving people
That's
that are
absolutely right.
working really, really hard.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily just in the schools, but it's also just down the road here from AWSP at OSPI
Yep.
and the State Board and other places that are doing the same thing. So
That's right.
thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Michaela,
Yeah.
for coming in today and spending a little bit of time with us. I know we didn't get to cover everything, and there'll
That's
still
right.
be more questions and whatnot.
Yep.
But just giving us that 30,000-foot view and then down into some weeds on a couple of things, I think will be very beneficial for the folks that watched today. So thank
right.
you so
Thanks
much.
a lot. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. All right.
And then thank you for joining us for this edition of AWSP TV. As we begin to venture forward, obviously we'll continue to stay in contact with OSPI and the State Board of Education and other stakeholders to provide that relevant and timely information that you're looking for in your schools and your districts. We wish you the best of luck as you venture into this summertime, and remember that strong principals create strong schools and strong students. Keep up the great work for kids. Until the next television newscast, goodbye.